The scent of lilies, my favourite, always filled our bedroom, a constant reminder of the tranquil life I had built with Mike. He was a good man, a loving husband, a provider. Our house, nestled in the quiet suburbs, was a picture of domestic bliss. Yet a nagging emptiness lingered within me, a yearning for something more, something beyond the familiar comfort of routine. I first saw Tony at Mike's brother's wedding. He was a vision, tall and lean with eyes that held a mischievous glint. He moved through the crowd like a panther, radiating an effortless charm that captivated everyone in the room. I found myself drawn to him, mesmerized by his easy laughter and the way he held himself with such confidence. But I was a married woman, and besides, who was I to even consider such a thought? My life with Mike was predictable, comfortable. We had our routines, our shared jokes, our quiet evenings on the couch. But something was missing, a spark, an adventure. Tony, with his enigmatic smile and his air of forbidden desire, represented everything that was missing from my life. I yearned to know him, to experience the thrill of the unknown, to feel the fire ignite within me. But I was a coward. The fear of rejection, the fear of jeopardizing my marriage held me back. I admired him from afar, a silent observer in the shadows, my heart aching with a longing I couldn't name. Then, one evening, the unexpected happened. I was home alone, relaxing in a bath, the scent of lavender filling the air. I heard a key turn in the lock, assuming it was Mike. I didn't bother to wrap myself in a towel. The door creaked open, and instead of Mike, it was Tony. He stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes widening in surprise as he took in the sight of me, naked and vulnerable. The air crackled with unspoken desire. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in the silence. I felt a blush creep up my neck, staining my skin crimson. Tony, finally breaking the spell, stepped into the room, his gaze lingering on my body with an intensity that both terrified and exhilarated me. He closed the door softly behind him, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic dripping of the bath water. He approached me slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, a mixture of fear and anticipation. He reached out a hand, his fingers tracing the curve of my shoulder, sending a jolt of electricity through me. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my skin, and whispered, "You are beautiful." The words, spoken in a low, husky voice, ignited a fire within me. I yearned for his touch, for his lips to meet mine. He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a soft, tentative kiss. It was a spark, a tiny flame that ignited a wildfire within me. I responded instinctively, my arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. He tasted of mint and something else, something wild and untamed. I tasted of lavender and desire. Our kiss deepened, a desperate exploration of forbidden territory. His hands, strong and sure, roamed over my body, eliciting shivers of pleasure. I felt a sense of surrender, a willingness to succumb to the intoxicating pull of his touch. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "Do you want this?" he whispered, his voice rough with desire. I nodded, unable to speak, my body trembling with anticipation. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a thrill coursing through me. He lowered himself into the bath, the water swirling around us. The warmth of his body against mine was intoxicating. He kissed me deeply, his tongue exploring the depths of my mouth, awakening a passion I never knew existed. I felt myself melting into him, lost in the intoxicating haze of his touch. My body arched against him, seeking a deeper connection. He groaned, his hands moving with a newfound urgency. I felt a surge of pleasure, a wave of sensation that washed over me, leaving me breathless. He moved inside me, slow and deliberate at first, then with increasing intensity. The world around us faded away, replaced by a symphony of sensations. I cried out, my voice muffled by the water, lost in a sea of pleasure. He held me close, his body moving in perfect rhythm with mine. I had never experienced anything like it, a raw, primal pleasure that consumed me entirely. I felt a sense of liberation, a release from the constraints of my ordinary life. As the intensity subsided, we lay entwined in the warm water, our bodies still trembling. He held me close, his breath fanning against my hair. "I've wanted you for so long," he whispered, his voice husky with satisfaction. I looked into his eyes, my heart overflowing with a mixture of guilt and exhilaration. I knew I had crossed a line, that I was betraying my husband, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. I had tasted forbidden fruit, and the taste was intoxicating. That first encounter opened a door I never knew existed. The fear that had held me captive vanished, replaced by a thrilling sense of liberation. Our meetings, initially clandestine and infrequent, became more frequent, more passionate. We would meet in secluded spots, a deserted beach at dawn, a hidden cabin in the woods, a motel room under assumed names. The thrill of the forbidden fueled our passion. Every stolen glance, every whispered word, every touch sent shivers down my spine. The danger, the secrecy, added an intoxicating element to our encounters. We were like two moths drawn to a dangerous flame, consumed by a desire that threatened to consume us both. With Tony, I discovered a new side of myself, a woman I never knew existed. He awakened a passion I never knew I possessed, a hunger that yearned to be satisfied. He explored my body with a reverence and a curiosity that made me feel cherished, desired, worshipped. He would spend hours tracing the curves of my body, whispering words of adoration in my ear, making me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. He knew how to push my limits, to tease me to the brink of ecstasy, to leave me breathless and wanting more. Our love-making was a symphony of senses, a passionate dance of bodies and souls. We would lose ourselves in the moment, surrendering to the intoxicating pull of desire. The guilt, of course, was always present, a nagging voice whispering in the back of my mind. I was betraying my husband, the man who had loved me unconditionally. But the allure of Tony, the intoxicating thrill of our forbidden love, overshadowed any lingering guilt. I justified my actions with 1,000 excuses. I told myself that my marriage had become stagnant, that I was no longer happy. I convinced myself that I deserved to experience passion, to feel alive. The affair had a profound effect on me. I felt a newfound sense of confidence, a newfound appreciation for my own desires. I started to dress differently, to experiment with new things, to embrace my sexuality. I felt a sense of liberation, a freedom I had never experienced before. But the emotional roller coaster was relentless. One moment I would be soaring high on a wave of euphoria, basking in the afterglow of our passionate encounters. The next I would be consumed by guilt and anxiety, haunted by the fear of discovery. I became a master of deception, weaving a complex web of lies to conceal our affair. I would invent excuses for late nights, for unexplained absences. I would scrutinize every phone call, every email, for any sign that Mike suspected something. The fear of discovery was a constant companion, a shadow that loomed over every stolen moment. I lived in a state of perpetual anxiety, constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But despite the fear, the allure of Tony, the intoxicating thrill of our forbidden love, continued to pull me in. I was trapped in a web of my own making, a prisoner of my own desires. Maintaining the charade became increasingly difficult. The web of lies I had woven around myself grew more intricate with each passing day. I became a skilled actress, playing the role of the devoted wife while my heart and mind were elsewhere. I would return home late from work meetings that never existed, my body still buzzing with the afterglow of our encounters. I would feign exhaustion, my eyes heavy with a tiredness that had nothing to do with a long day at the office. I would try to be more attentive to Mike, to shower him with affection, to convince myself that I was still happy with him. But the effort felt forced, artificial. The spark that had once ignited between us had dimmed. replaced by a sense of distance, a growing chasm between us. I noticed subtle changes in Mike's behaviour. He seemed more withdrawn, more preoccupied. He would often come home late from work, staying at the office longer than usual. I would catch him staring off into space, a melancholic expression on his face. I knew, deep down, that my behaviour was affecting him. I was neglecting him emotionally and physically. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the damage I was inflicting on my marriage. But the affair continued, fueled by a dangerous combination of passion and denial. I convinced myself that I was merely experiencing a temporary lapse in judgment, a fleeting moment of weakness. I told myself that I could still salvage my marriage, that I could eventually return to the woman I once was. But the truth was, I was losing myself in the affair. I was becoming a stranger to myself, a shadow of the woman I used to be. The joy I once found in simple things, a quiet evening at home, a walk in the park with Mike, had faded, replaced by a constant state of anxiety and unease. The fear of discovery loomed larger than ever. I imagined Mike finding out, the look of betrayal in his eyes, the shattering of our lives. I envisioned the whispers, the judgmental glances, the social ostracization that would inevitably follow. One evening, while I was out with Tony, I received a frantic call from Mike. He had been in a car accident, a minor fender bender, but he was shaken up and needed someone to be with him. I felt a surge of panic, a wave of guilt washing over me. I made up a flimsy excuse to Tony, promising to call him later. I rushed home, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and guilt. When I arrived, I found Mike sitting on the couch, his face pale, his hand trembling as he held a glass of water. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and confusion. "I thought you were with your sister," he said, his voice hoarse. My heart skipped a beat. I had to leave early. She needed me." He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze searching my face. I averted my eyes, unable to meet his gaze. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Yes, I'm fine," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He reached out to touch my face, but I pulled away, my body rigid with fear. "Linda," he said, his voice gentle. "What's going on?" I looked at him, my eyes pleading. "Nothing," I whispered. "Nothing's wrong." But the look in his eyes, the hurt, the confusion, told me that he knew something was amiss. The web of lies I had woven was beginning to unravel, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the inevitable confrontation was drawing closer. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It happened on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening, as we were eating dinner. The silence between us was deafening, a heavy weight hanging in the air. Mike put down his fork, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Linda," he began, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." My heart pounded against my ribs. I knew this moment was coming, but I wasn't prepared for the intensity of his gaze, the raw emotion in his eyes. "I know about Tony," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the colour drain from my face, my hands trembling uncontrollably. "I saw you," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "I saw you with him." I looked at him, speechless, the truth hanging heavy in the air. "How could you?" he asked, his voice cracking with pain. "How could you do this to me?" The words tumbled out of me, a torrent of apologies and justifications. "I'm sorry, Mike, I'm so sorry, I don't know what came over me." He shook his head, a look of disbelief on his face. "You don't know what came over you. You were having an affair with my own brother, Linda." The words echoed in my ears, a cruel reminder of the magnitude of my betrayal. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt, anger, and disbelief. "After all these years?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "After everything we've built together?" I could only nod, unable to find the words to express the depth of my regret. The ensuing argument was a cacophony of accusations, recriminations, and shattered dreams. Mike hurled accusations at me, his voice rising in anger. I tried to defend myself, to explain, but the words caught in my throat. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I sat on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, the weight of my betrayal finally crashing down on me. The aftermath was devastating. Mike moved out, taking a room at a friend's house. The silence that followed his departure was deafening, a constant reminder of the emptiness I had created. My life crumbled around me. Friends turned away. Whispers followed me everywhere I went. I lost my job, unable to face the judgmental eyes of my colleagues. I spent days locked in my room, consumed by guilt and despair. I tried to reach out to Mike, to beg for forgiveness, but he refused to see me. The pain was excruciating, a constant ache in my chest. I had shattered the trust he had placed in me, shattered the life we had built together. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild my life. I sought therapy, learning to deal with the emotional fallout of my actions. I started volunteering at a local shelter, trying to find some meaning in my life. I learned to live with the consequences of my choices. The pain never truly went away, but it gradually subsided, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I never saw Tony again. The memory of our affair, once a source of intoxicating excitement, now filled me with a profound sense of regret and shame. Looking back, I realized that I was not just betraying my husband, I was betraying myself. I was sacrificing my integrity, my happiness, for a fleeting moment of passion. The experience taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of honesty, trust, and self-respect. It taught me that true happiness cannot be built on a foundation of deceit. I may never fully recover from the damage I caused, but I am learning to forgive myself, one day at a time. I am learning to live with the consequences of my choices, and to rebuild my life one brick at a time. This story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that every action has consequences. It serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of cherishing the ones we love. I hope that by sharing my story, I can help others avoid making the same mistakes I did. I hope you learned something from my confession.